ARA's webinar to discuss ways that we can collectively improve gender diversity in the rail industry. My name is Caroline Wilkie and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at the ARA. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. For me, here in Canberra, it is the Ngunnawal people, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. It's so wonderful to have so many of you here to discuss this really important topic today. It's something that I'm very passionate about as CEO of the ARA. I think the ARA has a really important role to play in promoting gender diversity across our industry. And the work that we're going to discuss today was specifically organised to support our small to medium members and the wider industry to think about the issues around gender diversity. And it's been really interesting because I've had board directors and senior executives in the industry come to me and say, look, we've got one person in the HR team, they really want to do more in the gender but don't know where to start or don't have the resources. That's why we have today's project and today's discussion. I'd like to thank our webinar series sponsor, Frasher. Frasher are very generous sponsors of the ARA and our activities, and I thank them very much for their support. It's very much appreciated. The rail industry is planning for a significant period of growth, while at the same time grappling with skill shortages in key roles. Just today, Infrastructure Australia launched its market capacity report, looking at the shortfall for the industry based on the number of projects that we have over coming years. And as we expected, it's a stark gap between the numbers of who we have and who we need to get these projects done. As more projects get underway and the impact of the pandemic limits the movement of people, attracting and retaining more female employees is critical for the rail industry to meet its skills requirements. Today, we're going to discuss practical ways how the industry can access tools to support the attraction, retention, and advancement of women in the industry. We are very fortunate to hear from our guest speakers representing the Australian Government's Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, who will provide an overview of tools and recommendations that they've developed, which are instrumental for rail to further improve gender diversity. I'm also really pleased to launch today the ARA's Gender Diversity Resource Guide, which is now available on our website to help rail organisations connect to resources to create a gender-inclusive workplace. Many of these resources have been developed by WGEA, and I'm pleased to have two representatives from WGEA who will share more detail on these tools with us today. In addition, we have some real leaders in diversity and inclusion in our rail industry already who have implemented many successful initiatives. So the ARA will be building a library of these projects so that we can share best practice with the wider industry. To ensure that the ARA's and rail organisations' strategies and initiatives are having the desired effect, we do need to measure and benchmark our progress. That's why the ARA will again be coming out with its gender diversity survey, which is now being released and being communicated to members about the need for them to participate in this really important work. This work will accurately measure the state of gender diversity in our industry so that we can collectively enable further improvements. Our survey is actually based on WGEA's survey questions, but seeks to gather a more holistic representation of the rail industry, as it will capture government-owned organisations as well as those with less than 100 employees. This enables us to have a greater understanding of gender representation in the rail industry and the gender diversity strategies that are working and being implemented across the sector. The results of our last survey covered 2018 to 19 and demonstrated that 27% of the Australasian rail workforce are female. This was a 6% improvement on our previous report in 2016-2017. I hope to report on further progress when we publish our third quarter gender diversity report card for the rail industry towards the end of Q1 2022. The ARA will continue to offer a strong agenda on gender diversity events and programs in 2022. Sadly, those have been impacted this year, but we're really excited about what we have planned. Most importantly, this is going to include a really exciting new initiative, which is diversity training for our members in partnership with the Diversity Council of Australia. So please look out for that when details come out later this year. As part of today's webinar, the ARA's General Manager for Supply Chain, Natalie Curry, will outline our Gender Diversity Guide. Following Natalie's summary, I'll introduce our guest speakers who will present on a comprehensive set of resources and talk to some of the issues that are really important in this area. Over to you, Nat.
Thanks so much, Caroline. Yeah, I'm really pleased that we've been able to develop and publish a really practical guide to help organisations navigate the information and resources that they need to address gender equality gaps in their organisation. And as Caroline indicated, this project's really been spawned out of feedback from some industry members saying that they wanted to address gender diversity in their workforce, but didn't have a diversity and inclusion manager or even a dedicated human resource manager, and know that there's just so much information out there. Where do they start? And they just need some assistance navigating. So this document really aims to provide guidance for rail organisations who are seeking support and direction around what steps to take, in what order, what resources are available for their specific needs and type of workplace. So while it could be viewed that the resources, I guess, are specifically helpful for small and medium-sized businesses, the principles and the steps are the same regardless of the type and size of business that you have. The feedback we've gotten from larger organisations with D&I teams is that there's a helpful reminder really of the key aspects and useful tool to regroup and refocus their organisation. I do want to thank the ARA's Women in Rail Advisory Committee, as well as the ARA's Rail Industry Group and Rail Contractors Group, who assisted in developing this document to ensure it was most useful. The Gender Diversity Resources Guide provides a brief summary of steps and activity for organisations to address gender equality in their workplace. So step one's all about self-diagnosis. Understand where your organisation is at and what its goals and objectives are. You really need to ensure that you're not setting yourselves unreasonable targets and time frames to ensure it's achievable. Step two is really about developing and implementing a strategy to achieve these goals. So it might be easier to identify a focus area so you're not tackling everything at the same time. And whether that be improving workplace culture, reviewing approaches to recruitment and promotion, addressing gender pay equity, or implementing flexible arrangements for workers. So under each of these focus areas of the guide, we've listed a range of practical tools and free resources from reputable sources that can be used. But as we know, just developing a policy or strategy alone won't change outcomes. It's all about how it's implemented and monitored and tweaked as necessary along the way to ensure that you are meeting your objectives. So measuring progress is critical as an individual, an organisation, as an industry, and even society more generally. So we need to continually benchmark our journey. This really assists in managing accountability, but it also alerts us to when we need to raise the bar on the path of continual improvement. So that's why collecting data and participating in ARA's Gender Diversity Survey is really important and valuable. And so I look forward to your contributions. I also want to recognise that pursuing gender equality and diversity improvements within organisations, particularly in isolation, can be quite challenging. So often we need support beyond just the tools and resources themselves. So it's really encouraged that you become part of a community with people and organisations that can share experiences and lessons learned. And there are a number of different networks out there. The ARA has established a Women in Rail group on LinkedIn, which you can become a part of. And the ARA holds regular events online and face-to-face. And I'm really excited to see us develop a library of case studies that our members and others can benefit from. So that's a bit of a brief summary, really to encourage you to go and check out the guide. It's now available on our website after the webinar. And I'm really keen to hear more from WGEA reps around more detail around the resources that's included in this guide. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you, Nat. It now gives me a great pleasure to invite our guest speakers onto the screen. We are very fortunate today to be joined by Dr. Janin Bredehoeft, who is the Research, Analytics and Education Executive Manager at the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, WGEA, leading responsible for data management, analysis and benchmarking, as well as the research and education functions of the agency. A key aspect of Janin's role is unlocking the potential of the agency's world-leading data set through internal and external collaboration to enhance gender equality in Australian workplaces. Janin has a strong background in research, having completed her PhD at the University of Sydney in 2019, analysing the developments of academic labour markets in Germany and Australia. Welcome. We're also very fortunate to be joined today by Elyse Lane, the Senior Education Advisor at WGEA. Elyse develops educational materials on workplace gender equality and works with organisations, industry bodies and interest groups on developing, implementing and achieving strategic gender equality objectives. Elyse has a master's degree in gender and international development, and before coming to WGEA, she worked in education and gender equality, both here in Australia and overseas. And her areas of interest are pay equity, unconscious bias, and supporting and encouraging women in STEM, which is very relevant for today's conversations. Please pop any questions into the chat box so as we go along, and I will now invite them to make a presentation before we get to our questions. Thank you very much, Janin and Elyse.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you for having us here. It's a pleasure to see you guys here developing such a great tool. Congratulations to everyone involved to develop this tool. And thank you for having us here today. Before I begin, next slide, please. Before I begin, I too would like to acknowledge and pay my respects to the traditional owners of the country, past, present, and those to come, from the country of land which I speak from today. That's in Sydney. That's the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. As we share our knowledge, learnings, and research, may we also respect the knowledge embedded forever within the Aboriginal custodianship of country. Today, next slide, please. Today, we're going to talk you through a lot, so bear with us. We always sort of touch a little bit on all the different tools and resources we have. And yeah, we really invite you then to dig further and come to our website, download them and have a look further. And we are certainly open for any questions that you have today at the webinar, but also for the time to come. Next slide, please. So who are we? For those of you who may not know what's the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, the agency was established under the Workplace Gender Equality Act in 2012. And we are a federal statutory agency charged with promoting, improving gender equality in Australian workplaces. And we do this really by two different functions. We are employers are required to lodge a report to us each year relating to their gender equality indicators. And this is all employers with 100 or more employees. We are also, though, an educator and an influencer, and under this function, we educate and influence all workplaces regardless of their size. So also we have tools and resources on our website for small and medium businesses. Next slide, please. Slide. So where to begin? It's often maybe a little bit of a confronting journey to say, where do we start this journey on gender equality? And I guess from where we sit, we often find that a lot of organizations start with getting some sort of leadership buy-in and therefore creating a business case for gender equality for their own organization. And what we found is last year in 2020, we were able to commission this wonderful report with Bank West Curtin, who found that organizations with greater gender equality in leadership have greater productivity. So that was the first time we actually could make such a link, and because of the data set that we have collected over the past 7 years. So I encourage everyone to really have a read of this, which really is a causal link between gender equality and the increase in productivity, particularly in ASX companies. In developing a business case for gender equality, it is really important to note that what gender equality promotes is it future-proofs the Australian labour force. And I think, as Caroline Wilkie just said, there is some labour and employment shortages. And, this is really something that you can future-proof your labour force with, your workforce. It is an enhanced ability to attract talent and to retain talent as well. And also we see that enhanced organizational reputation of organizations who have gender equality on their agenda, or who then also move forward to have the employer of choice for gender equality. So there is a strong, convincing relationship between increasing women in leadership and improving company performance, as well as a strong relationship between the ability to attract and retain employees. Next slide, please. Over to Elyse, because then we go on to say where to start next and what to do next. And what we as an agency recommend is to compile and look at a gender equality strategy. So over to my colleague Elyse.
Thank you, Janin. So look, as Janin mentioned, we're actually going to talk about quite a few resources today. But I did want to take a bit of time to talk about our gender equality strategy toolkit, because I think it's really at the core of what we do, and it kind of touches all of the other resources that we're going to talk about today as well. So the toolkit was a culmination of some very extensive consultation that we did with business, industry, and also academia. And we did this to identify some key areas for action on gender equality in the workplace and the steps that we should take. So a strategy should be your foundational plan to achieve a range of objectives, and it's kind of your blueprint document by which you're accountable against measurable objectives, but it should also set out clear expectations about who will execute the work and in what time frame. So neglecting a strategy is kind of, I think, like trying to build a house without plans or without a solid foundation. You can probably do it, but it's probably not going to be as easy, and the outcomes might not be as robust. So for this reason, we highly recommend that organizations take the time to build a strategy and to support their overarching gender equality vision. So a gender equality strategy will include measurable objectives, as I've mentioned, and those will be linked to goals. It should improve active and inclusive leadership. It should be easy to communicate. That's really important. It holds an organization accountable for its gender equality progress, follows a transparent governance process. Look, it may also go beyond gender equality to touch on other areas of diversity inclusion. And finally, it should be integrated with all functions and levels of an organization. That said, we do acknowledge that there is no silver bullet. There is no one thing that can lead to improved gender equality, but the toolkit does identify a range of evidence-based levers that, when addressed, can lead to positive results. So as part of the toolkit, there are two documents. The first is the diagnostic tool, which I'm going to talk you through first, and then I'll move on and talk about the guide to developing and implementing a gender equality strategy. So the diagnostic tool, and you can see a picture of it on your screen now, it's part of the overarching strategy development, and it's important so that your organization can assess how it's already performing on gender equality and benchmark your progress. So the diagnostic tool has 17 key focus areas, which you can see on your screen, and they range from issues that would be prioritized at the beginning of your gender equality journey right through to what we would consider things that you might only be prioritizing when you're approaching a leading practice example. So I point out too that in the ARA's gender diversity guide, they've actually identified 4 key focus areas. So that might be your place to start. So the diagnostic tool aims to help organizations to analyze the status of gender equality within their organization and to pinpoint any gaps, and then the next steps in addressing those gaps. Next slide, please. So the diagnostic tool contains a series of metrics, and these correspond to the 17 focus areas, and you can use them to assess your organization's progress against each area. So each focus area has an assessment tool, which you can see that table on your screen now, as well as suggested data points, which you will draw your assessment from, and as some suggestions for the next steps, as well as some recommended resources. So on the right of the screen is a scorecard, and you use that to measure your progress against each of the focus areas. So you'll see in the table there's a series of questions, And basically, you're going to give yes or no answers to each of those questions, and then use the scorecard to assess where you are. So there are 4 outcome categories. So they are meeting minimum requirements, active, strategic, and leading practice. In this case, for the focus areas, the more yeses there are, the closer you are to leading practice. So in this way, you can continuously return to this process and hopefully over time address any of the questions that you're answering no to, and hopefully transform them into action and turn them into yeses. Apart from the scoring for each focus area, you can also use the toolkit to get a more holistic assessment of how your organisation is doing on its journey towards gender equality. And you can do this because each question will also be given a numeric value. And then once you've scored against all of your focus areas, you'll have an overall numeric value. And again, there's an overall scorecard at the bottom of the document that you can use to assess whether your organisation, again, is at the very beginning, just meeting those minimum requirements, right through to, are we a leading practice organisation? And in that way, we've designed the toolkit to be used by the broadest range of organisations possible. And I would say that, you know, while there may be some organisations out there that are answering yes to every single question, we think that, you know, there would still be a lot of suggestions and work to do for most organisations. So you can continually return to the diagnostic tool. Next slide, please. Great. So the diagnostic tool is part of the overall development of gender equality strategy development process. So we've really designed it to be used in conjunction with our gender equality strategy guide. The guide outlines 8 steps that your organisation can take to develop and implement your overarching gender equality strategy. And we highly recommend that you do undertake that diagnostic process as part of step 3. So it's important to remember, as I think Natalie mentioned before, that a strategy is a dynamic document. It's going to continue to change and evolve over time as you move through and continue to monitor and evaluate your progress. So if done correctly, it's not going to be a stagnant document. It's going to keep on changing. And without a strategy, it's very difficult to gauge whether your day-to-day activities and decisions are really driving effective progress. A gender equality strategy really enables organisations to move beyond an ad hoc approach to a more structured and programmatic approach. And having a shared understanding of the strategy really increases commitment within an organisation and enables all parts of the organisation to work together towards achieving a shared goal. So you can access the full toolkit on our website. It's under the Take Action menu item on the top of the menu bar. And now I'll hand you back to Janin to talk about employee consultation.
Thank you, Elyse. Employee consultation, that's one of our next steps guide. I think while there is no such thing as one size fits all for organizations, there's 3 really important things for me to analyze in the organization. And one is, of course, data analysis, and as Elyse spoke through, do your diagnostic in the organization, then try to get leadership buy-in. And the third really important pillar is employee consultation and employee engagement. In order to gain employee engagement, and we recommend to consult with all employees. Next slide, please, sorry. And you can do this by doing surveys, just organization-wide surveys, but then also looking at, after a survey, maybe doing workshops and or focus groups in total, which will give you just a bit better picture of where your employees are and understand what your employees' needs are and the priorities of your employees in the moment. And then it will give you the buy-in to really move on the journey towards more gender equality in your organization. Next slide, please. Oh, now we come to that important point of pay equity. As was also said, we have a guide of pay equity on our website. Next slide, please. The guide to pay equity will introduce you to what is pay equity and why it is important. We often say, why does the pay gap and why does pay equity matter? The most important thing is that after a lifetime of work of women and men, women tend to retire with about 40% less superannuation in their accounts compared to men. And that means that more women are faced with poverty at the end of a working life. In order to really rectify this, the gender pay gap is a key issue. And we know that our organizations have gender pay gaps. We see that through our data, through the data that we receive. But what is the gender pay gap is the next question. The gender pay gap is the difference between women's and men's earnings. It's an international established indicator of women's position in the workforce, and it's caused by a range of social, economic, and historic factors. And there you can see the calculation on the screen as well. And more importantly, it is not the same as equal pay. Next slide, please. Oh. That's not the, there are, we'll come to what the equal pay is in a bit. There are different types of gender pay gaps, and gender pay gaps can be found at a national level. Currently, it's about 14.2% using the ABS figure. Then we have gender pay gaps across industries. Every industry has a full-time gender pay gap favoring men in every dominated industry. For example, even in healthcare, where it's dominated by women. We have gender pay gaps in every occupation. Every occupation has a full-time gender pay gap favoring working men, especially though in higher levels of management. And then we can see gender pay gaps in organizations. And most organizations have gender pay gaps across their entire workforce and within position levels or bands. Now, this is really not, if you do your analysis and you find gender pay gaps in your organization, don't be shocked, don't be surprised. I think it is we know that there are gender pay gaps. It is something that we can work towards closing these gender pay gaps. And I think that's what we would like organizations to go on a journey on, to close the gender pay gaps. Most organizational gender pay gaps are a result and are caused by women and men working in different occupations. So often women work in lower paid occupations compared to men who work in higher paid organizations. For example, men tend to work in leadership positions with higher pay. Women tend to work in administrative and clerical work that tend to attract lower pay. Next slide, please. So here we come. The gender pay gap is not the same as equal pay. Unequal pay is when two people are paid differently for work of equal or comparable value. And this has been unlawful in Australia for over 4 decades. So even if an organisation has addressed all instances of unequal pay, there may be still organisational gender pay gaps. As I said before, they resulted often from women and men working in different occupations, gendered occupations that attract different levels of pay. So next slide, please. So what can you do in an organisation? Take action on pay equity. Look at your data, really analyse your data. We have 2 really helpful resources on our website to do so. We have a guide to gender pay equity, which really outlines the process that we recommend to go through in an organisation. And then we have also a very, very helpful tool, which is the gender pay gap calculator. And in addition to this guide to the gender pay gap calculator, we have an Excel spreadsheet on our website that you can download, and that really you can copy and paste the data in, and it provides you with a great overview of where your organization has gender pay gaps. And we can recommend this guide, the tool, because you can add things like seniority, and you can add age or other determinants that you might want to choose in order to really detect and look for pay gaps in your organization. Next slide, please. Yeah, I think to undertake a gender pay gap analysis, one of the most important things is the gender inclusive job evaluation. And I think there are probably HR HR people amongst you that are much better in this than I can do, but to look at whether the jobs have the same responsibilities and therefore get paid the same are some of the things that a guide to job evaluation can do. And looking at what job responsibilities and entitlements a job has will help you justify certain pay gap that you may find in your organization, but also will help you justify pay rates that you have in your organization. And often job evaluation is a quite labor-intensive task, and therefore, but it is important to just keep it in mind and do it, on a regular cycle to see whether some jobs may have increased pay compared to others that might have been sort of stuck somewhere. So we really recommend to conduct a job evaluation regularly. Next slide. Over to Elyse now for our resources on flexible work.
Yeah, thank you, Janin. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about flexible work, and a flexible working arrangement is basically an agreement between a workplace and an employee to change the standard working arrangements, usually to better accommodate an employee's commitments outside of work. So flexible working arrangements usually encompass changes to hours, patterns and locations of work, but I think at this point we need to really consider like the sky is the limit with flexibility. We need to think laterally about how we work. And that's now, during COVID, more important than ever. We've seen that flexibility has become very crucial to the way that we work, but it still remains a key enabler for gender equality as well. So the research indicates that even organizations that have flexible working arrangements strategy or policy still face barriers in terms of gendered assumptions about who should be utilizing flex. And so in this instance, it's actually men who face bias when it comes to accessing flexible work, because flex is still associated with childcare, and the gendered norms around childcare tend to be that women are the ones who are responsible for taking care of the children. There's also an additional barrier for men, and that is a pressure to fit an ideal worker stereotype. So researchers found that working long hours is the strongest predictor for not using workplace entitlements, and unfortunately men do dominate this group. So organizational support is really key to encouraging male employees to utilize flex, and that's just another way that we're going to more equitably distribute the unpaid care work that happens outside of working hours as well. The evidence suggests that flexible working drives employee engagement and productivity, as well as boosting employee well-being and happiness. Access to flexible working is clearly linked to improved organizational productivity, an enhanced ability to attract and retain employees, improved employee well-being, an increased proportion of women in leadership, and also just future-proofing the workplace. Next slide, please. Okay, so the WGEA again has a suite of resources. Sorry for bombarding you with all of them, but these are also available on our website, and that includes the business case for flex, as well as guides to developing an overarching flexibility strategy or a policy. There's a readiness assessment tool, and also tailored guides for employees, managers, and even executives. If you're not sure where to start with flex, I would really recommend just going onto our website and clicking under the Take Action button, clicking on flexibility. And you might want to start with the business case and then maybe move to the readiness assessment. And from there, you might decide that you are going to develop a strategy for flexibility in your workplace, or you might go straight to developing a policy. And as always, there's no one size fits all for all organizations when it comes to this kind of strategic action. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to, we often hear that flexible working isn't appropriate or doesn't work for certain industries or occupations. And certainly I understand and know that the transport and rail industry has its own unique set of challenges. But I just want to emphasize that this doesn't mean that flex is impossible. In March 2016, the New South Wales Transport Cluster implemented an all roles flex policy. So that just meant everyone was able to apply for flexible working arrangements. One of our colleagues, Troy Roderick, later produced a case study with the cluster documenting how they went about implementing this policy in such a dynamic and 24-hour environment, which you will all be very familiar with. So the transport cluster at the time employed close to 30,000 people. And these employees worked across a series of different locations and services, including rail, ferry, light rail, and road. The cluster included both scheduled and non-scheduled roles. Some were front-facing staff, some were customer service support roles, others was transport operators. In fact, some of you may have even participated in the rollout of this policy. So the case study found that the cluster, it used a phased approach. It didn't happen overnight, but at the core of the implementation was an if not, why not mentality. And in the lead up to rolling out the policy, there was extensive, a 2-year period of training and planning. And this was to really anticipate the challenges that would come up along the way. And the key challenge that was highlighted was what appeared to be an entrenched and gendered cultural understanding of what flexible working arrangements were and also who should be utilising them. So after the policy was implemented, and I should emphasise with time and very direct leadership commitment, employee consultation revealed that the policy had a very direct impact on employee engagement and satisfaction. And this was felt particularly by women who reported higher instances of feeling supported in the workplace. And I think this kind of links back to the fact that we do know that women are still doing a disproportionate share of the unpaid care work, and therefore they're going to need access to flexible working arrangements. Although obviously we really support organisations who want to make sure that men are taking up these benefits as well. So if you want to read more about this report, you can find it online. It's called Does This Desk Make My Job Look Big? And it contains a lot of other case studies of the implementation of flexibility in non-traditional workplaces as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'll just talk a little bit about parental leave now. So parental leave policies are designed to support and protect working parents around the time of childbirth and adoption, and also just when children are young. And the availability of paid parental leave for each parent, it can foster a more equitable division of unpaid care work and improve family and work-life balance. So Australia has a combined approach to parental leave. We have our government scheme, and there are also a lot of organisations that provide employer-funded paid parental leave. And what we do know is that when employer-funded paid parental leave is available, men tend to take that rather than the government-funded parental leave. And look, the reason behind that is probably pretty simple. We know that statistically, men are more likely to be the higher income earner, and when families are kind of planning their finances when they're having a child, it can be very difficult for the higher earner to then go down to a minimum wage for a period of time. Next slide, please. So again, we have a number of resources available to you on our website, and they're all based in the research, which on parental leave is pretty clear. Parental leave encourages and supports women and men in their roles as employees and also carers. It can help to break down gender stereotypes around unpaid work, although I will say that's if men are taking it as well. Otherwise, it can kind of entrench those gendered norms. Organisations that provide strong parental leave schemes are more likely to have better recruitment and retention. Flexible, generous parental leave policies do encourage men to utilise them, and a supportive workplace culture is key to making sure that fathers or parents or men do take parental leave. So the WGEA data tells us that the average length of paid parental leave is about 10 weeks, but that's primarily taken by women as primary carers. And for secondary carers, that drops to 1 week, and that's predominantly taken by men. But we also know that leading practice is now moving towards a gender neutral parental leave. So that means the same entitlements, whether you're a male or a female or primary or secondary carer, you get the same amount of time to be with your family at such a crucial time. So the data tells us that leading practice organisations are offering 12 or more weeks of fully paid leave, and some are even offering upwards of 25 weeks. So you can imagine the kind of loyalty that would engender in employees that have access to an amazing benefit like that, although obviously not every organisation is going to be able to go straight to 25 weeks of gender neutral parental leave. To find out more about designing and implementing a parental leave policy or about leading practice, again, you can find our resources under the Take Action section on the menu. And I'll hand back over to you, Janin.
Thank you, Elyse. Another wonderful resource we have is our target setting tool. Again, you can find that on the website too. Target setting does accelerate gender equality in the workplace, and research has shown that leading companies are closing the gender gap by outlining diversity goals and targets. And it's important that it is quantifiable terms and setting specific measurable targets for achieving gender equality. Next slide, please. You can set targets for nearly everything. You could set targets. We can see organizations setting targets for women on leadership, women in boards, women as executive manager, or women or in particular occupations. But also we encourage organizations to set targets, for example, for men taking formal flexible leave, or for men taking parental leave for that matter. So our toolkit is also on the website, and it's really a guide in setting targets to improve and track progress over time towards gender equality. It includes a set of guidelines and target setting calculator to help you set targets and meet gender diversity targets, and will help you to set reasonable targets as well that are achievable. Next slide, please. Recruitment and promotion. That is one of my favorite topics. Next slide, please. We have a wonderful recruitment and promotion guide on our website that really talks about evidence-based actions that organizations can take to eliminate biases, unconscious biases, from the recruitment and promotion process at every step of the way. This was developed together with Sydney University experts, and yeah, it's just a couple of things and how bias can be eliminated in recruitment. For example, looking at gender neutral job advertisements. There are certain tools on the website that are free that they can check whether you have whether your advertisements are gender neutral. But often it's the easy things that we don't remember. I remember an organization talking to us and saying that they simply improved the number of applicants because they had a job requirement for a warehouse and logistics warehouse sort of role, and one of the requirements was to have a forklift driver's license. And they were like, well, no, we don't really need to do this, have this as a requirement. So they took it out of the job advertisement, and they therefore increased the proportion of female applicants by 40%. So they had 40% more female applicants where there were none previously. So sometimes these tiny little things that we might see and that have always been there can actually make a huge difference on gender equality in recruitment. Then it goes further on to look at gender balance in interview panels and invitations, specific recruitment and selection criteria, but also some ideas about how to structure interviews so not to let biases creep into interview questions and interviews. Anonymized performance review criteria, and then of course, like looking at whether you could do a task that often helps to eliminate biases as well. And then we also recommend some transparency around pay, which means, for example, providing pay bands as in the public sector to just provide an even level field for women and men. In terms of promotion, there train managers to provide specific feedback to women and men. Equal access to career and development is very important, and I think often as women are sort of shy of applying for a job because they may not have certain capabilities such as a forklift, but they may well be able to do this forklift license in no time. Value alternative leadership styles and create a dialogue around merit. Again, this is a really fabulous resource that I can just recommend. I couldn't recommend highly. Please have a look at that. And then the next slide. Oh, that is our summary document, our summary. So recommendations for all our employers, that is really all, and as Elyse has pointed out, all our resources are deeply based in evidence and research. So what we know is really that the first three points are the most important ones to start out. Gain leadership commitment, engage with your employees in terms of consultation, analyze and monitor your data, foster accountability, set measurable goals and targets, mainstream flexible working, eliminate bias from recruitment and promotion, offer gender equal access to parental leave, promote development, talent management, succession planning, and ensure clear and firm policies regarding discrimination and sexual harassment. And then apply a gender lens to procurement. We haven't talked about that today, but that's also something that's on our website. Yes, so thank you very much. And that was it from us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janin and Elyse. I really appreciate that. You know, whilst I'm here as the CEO of the ARA to facilitate this, I'm also an employer myself, obviously, with the team at the ARA, and I've already been furiously noting down some issues. I know, you know, as a CEO of a business, obviously flexibility and what that looks like post-lockdown is something that's really important, and also, you know, issues around parental leave. I mean, I've been really lucky. My husband was able to take a year off because he works for the Commonwealth Public Service when our son was born. So yeah, it's something that can make such a huge difference. So thank you so much for that. All of the links to those documents are actually within the ARA's document. I might invite Nat as well to join us on the screen. We're going to move to questions now. You can submit your questions via the questions pane. I do encourage you to do this. We're very fortunate to have such experts here. I have a couple of questions to kick off with, but please do send some questions through. There might be a number of leaders or HR people on this call who are really keen to address a number of the issues that have been raised today, but you know, in their workplace, they might not have the support that they need to move through. Any advice that you would give them as they're starting in this journey? And just kind of just start talking, and we'll just go, because rather than me throwing to one of you in particular.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Caroline, for the question. That's a really good question, and it does come up a lot when organizations come to us. And I think really the leadership buy-in is the key to start on the journey. And that's why we have all these, we have a lot of suite of documents that outline the business case, because as we know, leaders are interested in the bottom line, and leaders are interested in what does it do for us as an organization. So the business case really outlines all that, and the attraction and retention of talent is one of the most important things that I find leaders say, as well as that the evidence we have now that it really means an increase in productivity for the organization if we promote diversity and women. You know, I like to speak about more if we promote diversity in leadership. You know, that is diverse leadership bring the bottom line, you know, to an increase. I think that is a good selling point.
Yeah, and certainly within the rail industry, diversity is far more than gender. You know, I don't mean to be flippant about it, but I know when I started, I kind of joked it was, you know, white men over 50, and of the white men over 50, at least half of them are from the United Kingdom. So, you know, we don't have a huge, you know, it's also, you know, racial diversity, you know, diversity of all types in the industry that we need to focus on. Now, I might pass to you. I mean, I think, you know, in some ways rail is more advanced than, say, where I've come from in airports. What do you think's been holding us back in the rail sector, which is unique to our industry?
Yeah, that's a good point. But I think given the breadth of types of organisations in the rail industry, it's really important that we call out from past data. It's shown that some segments of the rail sector are far more advanced than others. So certainly in the passenger space, certainly with consultants, they've been doing this for longer. They've had far more focused initiatives, and that's proven the outcomes that we've seen. So it's not to say that everyone's not supportive. I think everyone is, but everyone has a different level of focus and effort that they're pushing in this space. But I do think some aspects, certainly the construction area in rail has struggled more in this space. And partly that is, I think, around perceptions. So we've got this real image problem in rail that, you know, it could be dirty or blokey. That can be a perception thing. It also can be a reality thing. And we know that cultural aspects within organisations is really key to ensure women and everyone feels safe and secure and included. And so addressing culture within organisations, I kind of feel is like a first step. We know people have done discriminative advertising to attract females, but they're not going to stay unless we address culture within organisations so they feel that they belong. And so, yeah, I think it's about an image for rail, but also addressing, the culture within the industry as well.
Absolutely. And I think that image thing, you know, in terms of picking people up from high school, college, university, TAFE is really important. That's why the ARA is also focusing on our Work in Rail project that we're doing at the moment, which will be incredibly important. Obviously, before we had this webinar and we came live, we were talking about the impact of COVID and what that has had on our workplaces, particularly in terms of flexibility and arrangements. I mean, what are you seeing in terms of the data and the information that you're getting about what the future expectations are going to be of the workforce when we hopefully, touch wood, do return to the office for all of us in 2022?
Well, I'll pass to Janin, but I think probably because COVID is still unfolding right now, we've just gone through and collected our latest data set. So we're still in the process now. So I think it's going to be a matter of wait and see. When we release our data in November, we have included a few additional questions related to flexibility in our questionnaire because of the COVID situation. So we can't tell you right now because we haven't analysed the data, but we'll probably have some good insights for you later in the year. I don't know if you want to add anything, Janin?
Yeah, we know that more organisations have embraced flexible working, and I do know that that is in the data. I can see that, which is great to see. I think from the return to work perspective, I am personally, and what I've read, a little bit worried and that we return to a pre-COVID where women stay home and women do not go back to the office, and men go to the office, and you know, office life comes with networking, promotion, getting the great projects, and that people who work from home might be disadvantaged if we don't, you know, look out for them. And I think it's up to us managers then to really ensure that we continue, you know, embracing working from home, but also being inclusive in our decision making about sort of this major project that have a massive impact on gender equality. So I actually personally, I love the office. I think there is we need to make sure that women, you know, are not overlooked in a climate where women tend to stay at home because they continue to do the domestic and care work at home. So that's a really big sort of next phase to look out for. There's huge opportunity, but I think there's also room for backlash, or there's room for they might fire back on us.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to be very interesting to see where it all lands. Targets can be quite a controversial topic for organisations. What are WGEA's views on targets, and what do you think organisations should keep in mind when they're considering that as an issue? Janin, I might start with you.
Look, we have seen targets work, and I think the Chief Executive Women Report also came out a couple of weeks ago, and targets work in Australia. Like, the organisations have set targets for women on boards, and that has achieved results, and we know that therefore, you know, organisations are more productive. So I think we need targets because we need to set goals. We need to have something to work towards and targets keep us accountable, particularly in management, keep managers accountable. We can put them in key performance indicators, and that has been proven to speed up the rate of change, I think. So yes, we shouldn't shy away from targets. And as I said, we also encourage organizations, to set targets for men in flax, for men in parental leave. like targets have a wide range of usage. But I would say one thing, set achievable targets. You know, don't set yourself up for failure when setting targets. Like targets can be step-by-step guiding you along.
I think that's a bit of a challenge in the rail industry too, because the number of women who might have either worked in rail or been around the rail industry or have transferable skills is still a relatively small pool, while we're still needing to do that work to move more people through the areas as well. So we've already got a skill shortage in the rail industry, so people are sort of cannibalizing everyone. So I think it's a fantastic time to be in rail, but it is certainly a challenge with unrealistic targets. Elyse, is there anything else you wanted to add on that topic?
No, I just wanted to emphasize that we're not doing anyone any favors if we set unrealistic targets. You're not doing, it's really not going to actually drive gender equality if we're, you know, promoting women or appointing women into roles that they haven't received the training or support for. So a staged approach to targets over time, making sure they're achievable. We know it works, but obviously it needs to be very achievable.
Obviously, I'm hoping that there are a lot of people on this call who are going to look at the document that the ARA has pulled together with a number of your resources and go, right, great, thank you. I now know the path I need to go on to deal with a number of these issues. For someone who's starting this journey, what do you think that looks like for them when they start picking this up as an issue, and how long can the journey take, do you think? Elyse, I might start with you, because obviously people might be looking at it feeling a bit intimidated by how much they need to do to move ahead.
Yeah, and that's completely understandable. And look, Janin and I work with organizations of all shapes and sizes, and we often get that question, where do I start? It's all so very confronting. There are so many resources out there. I don't know what to address first. That's why I would reiterate going back and doing a careful assessment. In your guide, you've already highlighted 4 focus areas for your industry, and I think that that's a really great place to start. You know, I tried to stress when I was talking about our diagnostic tool, where we've got this huge list of key focus areas. Start small, you know, like Rome wasn't built in a day. This is organizational change. This is cultural change we're talking about. It is slow. We've been having these conversations for a very long time, and we're going to have to continue to have these conversations for a very long time, but they're important, and we are seeing progress over time. Our data reflects that Australia is making progress, and we just need to keep that momentum going. So please don't be overwhelmed. Look at the resources, reach out to your support networks within ARA, you can reach out to WGEA, but really just try to narrow down to what you think are the key areas for you and what will be achievable, because you don't want to set goals that are just going to end up, you know, dissuading buy-in, or, kind of undermining the whole process.
Absolutely. Janine, any final comments on that particular issue?
No, I think I agree with everything Elyse said, and it's like it is overwhelming, but every little step in the right direction counts, and I think that's very important to note. And the smallest step, I mean, baby steps, baby start with baby steps. That's where we have to start. I think the important thing is really to focus on progress, not on anything else but progress. And progress is slow.
We could keep talking on this topic for a really long time, but I am going to have to draw us to a close. I did want to finish, though, by asking each of you for any final comments, final tips for anyone starting on this journey. Nat, any final comments from you?
Just start. Step in, don't be fearful. I think, I'm really keen for people to learn lessons is helpful, and sharing those lessons learned with others. Don't do this alone. There is a community, there is an ARA association that is here to help and support you along the way. So please reach out. Wonderful. Janine.
I think that's a great point. I'm going to add to that. What I found most amazing in this community, that people who work in the space, they're all so helpful. Like, just go out if you need anything. Like, I have spoken to large organizations that are happy to share their policies. They're happy to share their experiences to small organizations as well. And if a small organization doesn't have the resources, you know, ask us or ask big organizations. They're happy to share. You can adopt these resources. It's a great community, and we're actually all in for the cause, and that's wonderful. I think about all of us who are working in this field, and together we make it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Elyse, final comments from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to underscore what Janin was saying earlier about the importance of consulting your employees. Speak to your employees. They are going to know where you should be prioritizing your actions. It can be, you know, as simple as, you know, the forklift example that Janin mentioned, or some infrastructure. I mean, I'm thinking of a case where there were truck drivers, female truck drivers were struggling because there weren't any female toilets available to them. Sometimes it's these things that, you know, maybe the people sitting in HR who are devising these strategies are completely unaware of, and that's where employee consultation is so important.
I think that's a really wonderful point. That brings our webinar to an end. I'm really sorry. I wish we had more time because there's so much to talk about. I'll have to bring you back at another time and talk to you in more detail. You'll find a copy of the ARA New Gender Diversity Guide on the ARA website, and it will be circulated in the weekly update this week. I do encourage all of our ARA organisations to participate in our gender diversity survey, which is now out. Thank you so much, Elyse and Janin and Nat, for today. It's been fantastic. We really appreciated your time. A short feedback survey will be circulated, which I encourage you to take part in. And finally, this Friday, we're kicking off our 7-week Meet the Buyer program. I know many of you super look forward to this each year. And so I do encourage you to register. You can register for all of the events we have coming up over the next 7 weeks. But finally, on behalf of the ARA, thank you so much for participating today. Thank you for engaging and joining in, and I hope you have a lovely afternoon. Thank you very much.